Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the pictures in the HEIR Project Digital Image Archive with you today. HEIR stands for the Historic Environment Image Resource. It is maintained by the School of Archaeology Archive at the University of Oxford. The 33,000 plus images in HEIR consist primarily of pictures scanned from technologically obsolete media in the teaching collections from multiple parts of the university, plus privately amassed collections from archaeologists, classicists, historians, and others. A small number of modern images, rephotographing older views in HEIR, are also a feature of the collection. Archaeological sites, aerial photographs, landscapes, buildings, artifacts, artworks, plants, activities, and ethnographic images that span the time period from 1860 to the present day are all represented. This diverse collection is of use to academics, field archaeologists, and anyone with an interest in the past. The pictures I'll be using here, though mostly from the School of Archaeology, also come from other departments, specifically the Ashmolean Museum, the Department of the History of Art, the Geography and Plant Science collections of the Radcliffe Science Library, which is part of the Bodleian system, and Harris Manchester College. Getting the commercial out of the way, funding for HEIR has come from the Revid and David Logan Foundation, the Frankopan Foundation, other private donors, and the University of Oxford. Floor space and storage space have an economic value that is easily calculated relative to cost per square meter. The value of images stored in technologically obsolete formats is far more difficult to price, particularly when the pictures have been unseen for 70 years or more. After an initial, brief review of the material turned up amazing pictures, the department supported a funding request to preserve some of the collection through scanning. Once scanning began, the next challenge was to determine the relevance, if any, the pictures had to cutting-edge 21st century archaeology and heritage work or anything else. That's the story I'll be telling today. I'll provide some examples of ways that our once-lost images have relevance to the contemporary world. When we heard the terrible news reports of the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in 2019, one of our first thoughts was to post a picture of the cathedral on social media and discuss the loss. In searching through our set of cathedral pictures, we noticed this one from the Department of the History of Art. It stood out from the others as the spire that had so tragically burned down was missing. How, we wondered, could that be? We suddenly realized that this was the oldest image in our collection, having been taken no later than 1860. The picture shows a view of the cathedral as it looked between 1786, when the failing early original 13th century spire was removed, and its replacement with a design created by the architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc during the restoration of the cathedral between 1857 and 1864. When posted on social media, this unique picture rapidly became one of our most viewed posts on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. Most of what I've seen in print since the fire suggests that the cathedral should be rebuilt with a new spire. But what should it look like? A reproduction of the original medieval spire, a replica of the 19th century replacement, or a 21st century expression of faith? If a faithful recreation of the past is the final choice, old paintings and photographs will be vital to that effort. When the Temple of Baal-Shemin in Palmyra, Syria was destroyed by ISIS in 2015, HEIR was able to contribute multiple pictures from the database, including this 1932 view, to global efforts to create 3D models of the lost structure. Perhaps one day the pictures may help with site restorations or recreations. The pictures in HEIR include images related to major discoveries of the 19th and 20th centuries, some of which are now rarely discussed. As the university has a long record of classical studies, the database reflects this bias. HEIR retrieves more than 6,800 images if you search the database using just the word Roman. While many are views of places or artifacts that are well known, others come as surprises. Although this may look like something associated with Goth-style clothing, it's Roman leatherwork. These finds were recovered at Vindonissa, a Roman military site in Vicus in Switzerland. You may never have heard of it, as most of the research on this site was written in German. Far different from the occasional Roman shoe or sandal found in a British well or peat bog, this ornately worked leather from uniforms is evidence of literacy within the Roman army, something still debated. In the top left example, the 11th Legion is prominently named. Also known as 11 Claudia Pia Fidelis, they occupied the fort from 69 until 101 CE, when the settlement became a purely civilian one, which helped to precisely date the finds even in the era before carbon dating. There are 37 more Vindonissa images in HEIR, including more examples of military leatherwork. An instance where the importance of our pictures wasn't immediately apparent to the HEIR staff is this picture of a Romano British mosaic, one of a set of 2 views of the floor in situ that were scanned and added to the image database in 2018. We knew it as the Neptune mosaic from Cirencester after copying the label information from the lantern slide into HEIR. In 2020, we heard from Dr. Miles Russell of Bournemouth University, who told us it was a Francis Haverfield photo, one of only 2 surviving images of the mosaic in situ. The mosaic is now listed in the Gloucestershire HEIR as the Ashcroft Road mosaic, having been found in Haverfield's 1902 to 1905 excavation at Ashcroft House. We think that all the images in HEIR are special, though some perhaps even more so than others. This mosaic is certainly a special example, perhaps the most peculiar representation of the she-wolf of Rome ever set into a floor. Known as the Wolf of the Cerium, it was found in 1852 near Aldborough, North Yorkshire, and it can be seen in the Leeds City Museum. We'll never know if this was a practice piece by an apprentice, a design attempted by an untrained person trying to follow a Roman fashion, or something created by a child and preserved by an adoring parent or grandparent, but it truly is a mosaic in a class of its own. It is a reminder of the importance of perspective. Beauty, or its absence, is in the eye of the beholder. Perspective can also be gained through the consideration of elapsed time and incremental change. Holding images from many famous excavations, HEIR is a great resource for studying continuity and change within archaeological practice. In addition to site photos, the archive contains plans, maps, and artifact illustrations, not all of which were published. I'll present some examples from Knossos, Crete, to illustrate that. This map is signed in the lower left corner by the cartographer Bernhard Vernon Derbyshire of Oxford and dated 1900. Although Derbyshire worked at Oxford School of Geography at the time, the image comes from a lantern slide owned by the School of Archaeology. The title of the lantern slide identified it as Mycenaean Sites Known in 1899, before excavation of Knossos, so it's a great place to start a brief review of the Knossos dig. A similar modern map of Mycenaean sites would have far more red dots. We'll see pictures of Sir Arthur Evans' early 20th century work in Crete. We were pleased to find this rare view of the site before his initial excavation in 1900. This picture was taken a few years later in Candia, Crete, by Oxford professor John L. Myers. Scanned from a negative, it was captioned, "Mr. Evans' House." It took the HEIR team a while to figure out that the house was being used while the excavation was in progress by the man we know as Sir Arthur Evans, before he was knighted in 1911. Here, repetition of the title over time had made a name that would have been clear to Myers and his contemporaries, obscure to us more than a century later. Although this base camp with tents at Knossos resembles modern sites in some ways, the clothing is a far cry from contemporary excavation attire. White shirts and waistcoats are no longer typical site dress. One area of continuity in archaeological practice is the presence of occasional visitors to the dig, including children. The image on the left, taken in 1901 by Dr. Richard C. Catton, shows visitors from a cruise ship touring at Knossos. The right-hand picture, scanned from a cracked lantern slide, shows 2 local boys visiting the site. The placement of the workman between the boys suggests that he may be a close relative. Perhaps one of the greatest changes seen in archaeological practice is found in the sheer number of people working on excavations. While daily planning meetings still happen, the work crew is much smaller and may well include many volunteers, unlike the scene from Knossos. We may also see some continuity in practice from the past to the present here, as this might be described as a community dig with extensive public engagement. The previously mentioned Professor Myers is pictured here at the site base, standing next to a wooden storage rack filled with wooden small find trays. Plastic find trays and storage boxes are the norm now. This scene is one you'll never see on a modern dig, where whole pots are usually gently wrapped in bubble wrap and put into individual boxes. As a person who studied ceramics, the first time I saw this picture, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry over how these ancient Minoan pithoi were being treated. In this early 20th century image that possibly replicates their early use life cycle in the Bronze Age, the storage jars are being moved on the backs of donkeys, secured by ropes running around the vessel necks and through the original handles. A bit of what appears to be cloth padding has been inserted between them. I'll close with a final bit of continuity from Knossos you're certain to recognize, the end of dig party. Archaeology uses the remains of the past to learn about the past, sometimes supplemented with ethnographic parallels or experimental archaeology to confirm or refute ideas. I'd like to share some stories relating how HEIR images have led to rethinking of archaeology-related ideas. My first two examples are personal ones. HEIR images are useful for confronting unacknowledged stereotypes that can affect the interpretation of artifacts. Let's take the study of grain preparation using querns. I have no issue with the fact that these pictures used by respected archaeologists show grain preparation as the exclusive domain of women. This is supported by a great deal of ethnographic data, although in truth there's no physiological barrier preventing men from using these tools, only cultural ones. All of these illustrations also have another, less obvious feature in common. The women are shown working in isolation. Now, I've found both saddle and rotary quern fragments on digs, and when I encountered these artifacts, I interpreted them based on a mental model shaped by teaching materials that use similar illustrations and personal experience. I envisioned a woman working on her own at a physically painful task, placing significant stress on her body that can be identified in skeletal remains. In Britain's damp climate, this image grew even darker in my thoughts as I envisioned the woman who had worked with the stone inside a prehistoric roundhouse, crouched in poor light provided from a central hearth, a doorway, or the smoke hole in the roof. Yet the 19th century photographic evidence in HEIR, while supporting the gender stereotype, refutes the less obvious concept that grain preparation was done in social isolation indoors. In other words, my paradigm could be completely wrong. Clearly, grain processing can be done outdoors in decent weather and can be quite sociable. The social interaction probably helps to deal with the tedium and physical strain of this repetitive but necessary task. I had also never suspected that a mat, as is shown in the top right picture, might be used as a base for the quern and its work area. Such an organic artifact would be unlikely to survive in Britain's archaeological record and never appears in illustrations, though it would have been useful to reduce waste of grain and flour. A second idea of mine involved the use of spindle whorls and was based on illustrations I'd seen in text, on artifacts, and in recreated prehistoric houses. For example, the woman on the left of this 5th century BCE Attic red-figured ware hydria is using a spindle whorl in what would appear to be an indoor domestic setting. I had always envisioned spinning being an indoor domestic task as shown here. But my idea that spindle whorl use was only an indoor occupation was challenged as well. As shown in this 1931 picture from Venka, Serbia, with sufficient experience you can actually spin wool while outdoors herding your livestock. It had never occurred to me that this task could be performed while walking outdoors. This would greatly expand the potential hours available for domestic spinning, especially in pastoral societies. It is only with the invention of the spinning wheel in the 14th century that spinning becomes an exclusively static activity. My thinking has been unconsciously shaped by images of this latter technology and applied to my perception of the more distant past. I am not alone in finding new thinking inspired by old HEIR images. This view changed the thinking of Dr. Elinizimi, assistant professor of classical archaeology at the University of the Peloponnese in Greece and a native of Athens. This picture features the Temple of Zeus, later known as the Temple of Jupiter in Athens, with the Acropolis in the background. It was probably taken in the last decade of the 19th century. At that time, Athens was a very small city, quite unlike the modern metropolis of today. This is just one of HEIR's 556 pictures of that city. Dr. Zimi had always been puzzled by the long distance between this temple and those of the Acropolis, given Zeus' importance in the pantheon of Greek gods. It would take nearly an hour to drive from the temple to the Acropolis during the rush hour. However, this picture showed a city much more akin to ancient Greece than the modern one in terms of development. She realized that you could walk from this temple across the undeveloped open spaces in 15 or 20 minutes, possibly even less if you hurried. To those who worshipped there in the past, the temple was neither distant nor isolated from the other center of worship. Without realizing it, her lived experience of Athens had colored her perception of the distance between these sites. Might HEIR pictures provide new insights for your own work? As I was just discussing, there is value in looking at sites at particular moments in time. In this section, we consider the value of multiple images of the same place using HEIR. Here we have 4 views of the Arch of Marcus Aurelius in Tripoli, Libya, which span more than a century. The top left shows the arch as it appeared about 1895 when Professor Myers visited North Africa, fully integrated into Tripoli's marketplace, the interior space being used much as we might use a railway arch. On the top right, we see Italian colonial archaeologists working on a restoration of the arch in April 1914, symbolically reasserting Rome's historic power over Libya. The picture in the lower left, taken by D.E.L. Haynes before 1947, shows the arch just before the Italian administration ended. In the lower right, we see the arch again in 1997, photographed by another Oxford professor, Andrew Wilson, now serving as an outdoor tourist site for those interested in Libya's Roman past. One site with different meanings at different moments in time. HEIR isn't just about large, famous sites. It also has pictures of less prominent ones. Modern rephotographs of sites in the original teaching collections donated to HEIR are an important feature of the archive. Evolution can be demonstrated even at smaller sites. This Romano British temple is in Benwell, Tyne and Wear. The pictures were taken about 1941, in 1963, and 2018. Although the shape of the building has been consistent during this roughly 70-year period, the artifacts on display have changed, their location has been altered, the lawn within the building was first reduced and then removed. Interpretive signs had been added by 2018. Change is also visible in the adjacent houses beyond the perimeter fence. There's a story to be told here. Why were the changes made? What do they mean about the accuracy of the site as a representation of the past at these various points in time? The impact of changing climate is certainly relevant to archaeology, and HEIR has images that can help to express the magnitude of climate change since the invention of photography. Both of these views show the French glacier known as the Mer de Glace, or the Sea of Ice. The left-hand image is a winter view from the last quarter of the 19th century, and the hand-colored one on the right, a summer view from the early 20th. By 2015, the Mer de Glace had retreated 2 kilometers from its 1850 position. These earlier images tell part of that story. HEIR is also a great resource for tracking change in archaeological thought and how it was represented. For example, this image from about 1900 showing an early human ancestor emphasizes the brutish nature of this hominin, thinking now quite alien with more than a century of evidence to support an opposite view. Since the mid-20th century, radiocarbon and other laboratory-based techniques have revolutionized archaeological dating. But before those techniques were available, pottery was often used to provide the basis for relative site dating. As a result, archaeology students were expected to learn the pottery types and styles for the region and time period in which they specialized. There's ample evidence of this in the HEIR images. The hand-colored collection of Bronze Age collared cinerary urns from Dorset and Wiltshire would have been used in teaching during the early part of the 20th century. The hand-drawn chart shows the role of pottery in dating the phases of the site of Kisharak in 1928, when it was jointly excavated by the Ashmolean Museum and the Field Museum of Chicago. I'll close this discussion of change over time in archaeological thought and practice with this 1870 engraving by Émile Bayard from the book Primitive Man by Louis Figuier. Despite this picture, much current theory supports the idea that small-scale domestic pottery production was the domain of women, not men, a very different idea than what is shown here. Thank you for your time today. I hope you've enjoyed this brief visit to the HEIR Project Digital Image Archive, and I hope you'll visit soon. See what we have to offer and how the past can shape your thinking in the present.